I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Okay, hi guys. Welcome to the trial day 2 of the uh, murder trial of Jennifer Dulos. That's an excerpt from the, I think it's a 48 hours documentary. We'll kind of go back to that in a moment. What you pick up when you hear Michelle Troconis' family talking is that they are likely Greek. I could be wrong. Maybe it's not Greek, it's something else. But as far as I know, Fotis Dulos is Greek. And I've heard the fact that he's Greek coming up every now and then. And I guess the question is that relevant? Is it relevant to be talking about someone who's Greek, right? And to be quite honest, my answer to that is I don't know. I don't know if it is relevant. What is quite interesting in this opening is where they basically say she wouldn't harm anyone. And I don't think that is really what is at issue here. I don't think the question is whether she, Michelle Troconis, hurt anyone or killed anyone. I think the issue is whether she's an accessory after the fact. So I do think any kind of statement where you say she wouldn't hurt anyone, it's not really relevant. What's relevant is she an honest person? What is the relationship like with Fotis, right? The other thing that I think is really interesting in this case is the perpetrator is no longer with us, right? And so is there going to be a sense among the jury to get payback, to get revenge, in other words, in a way to get someone to pay the piper for this crime, because he can't, he died. And so it's kind of this question of, is Michelle potentially going to be the fall guy? I'm not saying that she's completely innocent, but is she gonna get potentially get a heavier sentence than she otherwise would have gotten because the guy that should have paid for this crime is gone? I just think that it's quite an interesting way of thinking about it. The other thing that's interesting is we're going to deal with evidence in that garage. And I think it's also a valid question to say, in terms of the legalities, how is that related to Michelle, right? And let me put that ball into your court, right? Let me put that ball into your court. How is it related to Michelle? So if Michelle didn't commit the crime, if Michelle wasn't in that garage, if Michelle didn't clean up those spots of blood, then how is this sort of thing related to her? And it's all of these. I actually need this file. It's all of these slides. And so what you can see here is a schematic of the garage, and you see it divided into quadrants A, B, C, and that's on the left-hand side. That's this quadrant over here. That's A, B, C, right? And then D, E, F is the far right-hand side quadrant. And then G is the quadrant where the Range Rover was parked. And you can see it's parked at a slight angle there. And then something that's highlighted here is over here, area of convergence. What do you think that is referring to? What do you think that area of convergence is referring to? So the original question is, why are we examining the crime scene, the blood in the crime scene, if Michelle was never there? Why are we examining in detail the area where Jennifer was murdered if Michelle was never there? Yeah, bloodstains. And what do you guys say? What do you think is the answer? Terry, good to see you here. Any ideas? Why are we examining a crime scene, bloodstains, and all the evidence there? Let me just show you a little bit more. You can see that particular drop, A15, is exhibit 40, and one presumes that exhibit was tested, and it's either going to be positive for blood or it's going to be positive for like a DNA match to Jennifer or both, right? And possibly the same with A18, that's exhibit 41. But the question now is, if Jennifer wasn't murdered by Michelle, then why are we even dealing with this crime scene? What do you guys say? It is the area of the murder, but can you see what I'm trying to say? If Michelle was never there, if Michelle was never in that garage, if Michelle didn't participate in the murder in situ, right, in that garage, then why are we dealing with this evidence? I mean, we are not, Fotis Dulos isn't on trial here. Michelle Troconis is, right? Elf says it's like a trial within a trial. And well, let me, okay, so that's quite a good point. I think there are a couple of reasons. One is to show, to kind of prove that Jennifer is dead, right? It's kind of because there's no body. It's to prove that Jennifer is dead, and then also to show how the blood in the garage moves into other vehicles. In other words, to tell the story of the blood trail, the evidence trail from the garage to various other vehicles, including vehicles that were subsequently cleaned, right? And so it is, as far as I'm concerned, it's to make the legal argument that harm came to for the jury's benefit, harm came to Jennifer, and although Michelle's not the perpetrator, she was nevertheless part of the process of helping her disappear. That's the case that the prosecution are trying to make. And they're starting at the beginning. They're not starting at the vehicle that Michelle was driving. Does that make sense? Magical Helen says, I'm not familiar with the case, but saw TCRS was live. Okay, well, you should become familiar with it quite quickly. That's also part of it. So it's quite important to remember, yes, she may not have committed this murder, but they first got to, in a way, prove, because there's no remains, they've got to prove that there was a murder committed to begin with, and they've got to start somewhere. That's why they're starting here. Okay. So in this particular image, I'm going to just make it a little bit bigger. Don't those look like smear marks? Smear marks, as though that looks like it could be a little certain amount of blood. There's looks like a white ruler there. There's a ruler over here. There's a ruler over there. Looks like a ruler over here. And if you look closely, those excuse me, these do look like quite substantial smear marks. They've got kind of a slightly orange color. There's another one that's quite substantial. And so just going by this image, doesn't it look like the crime was spread out the garage? It wasn't just in one place, because bear in mind, this is quadrant D and that's quadrant E, right? So let's go back. all of these little rulers are in quadrants D, E, and I'm not sure if they are in F, but you can see there's quite a lot going on here. And so a question I would have is, where would Jennifer normally park her car? Would she normally park over here? And look at all of these sports bags. Would she normally park here? And did she get out of her truck on this side? Or would she normally get out on the other side? In effect, where did this crime actually happen in the garage? On the left-hand side or on the right-hand side? Was the attack on the left and she was then dragged to the right, or was the attack on the right and she was dragged to the left? Or was the attack kind of on these steps over here? And so it's actually becoming quite a complicated case just in terms of trying to figure out what happened in this garage. So obviously there is evidence that has been deposited. There's evidence that's been cleaned away, and then there's evidence that's nevertheless remained behind, diluted evidence, part of the original, and now one's got to try and piece this together, literally piece together the puzzle. And in that sense, it's quite a complicated case. In terms of just saying how and where in the garage the crime was committed. It does seem like there's more evidence on the this side, the AGD side of the garage, than anywhere else. It's more on this side than that side. That's a inference we can certainly draw. Okay, so we're going to listen to a little bit of the trial, and then we'll come back to this. Okay. I think they're on a lunch break right at the moment. Just
picture 1, which is actually a PDF. And Your Honor, I will say this is with respect to Sergeant Pearson, I have to alternate between PDFs and photographs, so it might not go as smoothly as I hope. With respect to what's behind you, Sergeant, if you can, do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is it?
That is the first map of 8, which is an overall of the garage located at 69 Wells Lane.
Now, you talked a little bit about taking measurements and utilizing a ruler and a tape measure, I guess. Is that a way to say it? Thank you. Can you walk us through, perhaps explain how you use those tools to create this map?
Yes, in this case, I used a rectangular coordinate method, which is the method where you have 2 steel tapes on the ground in this instance, and they intersect at a right angle to determine a distance from 2 known points. In this case, it was the footings of the poured cement garage floor.
Would you mind, please, Your Honor, may I ask her to go up to the screen point? Thank you. Sergeant Pearson, can you please?
So she's referring to the edges of the garage that are used to place those rulers in relation to.
Cement that protrudes to the interior of the sheetrock walls.
And do you have a marking next to that, and you have an arrow directing it? This is in the, I guess, the bottom middle.
Now I'm going to interrupt this just to say the sergeant kind of goes through quite at length the various evidence items, basically just running through it, not really providing much context or information about it, saying, did you take the photo? Yes or no? And usually I think it was no. Did you take the measurement? Yes, I did. And basically just in the same way when we looked at the body cam, just reviewing all of it. And I think it's going to be up to another expert to talk about whether the evidence was ultimately blood and the DNA aspect. So she kind of took us through everything, but she basically measured it and found the evidence, and then it was really up to somebody else to interpret it. The thing that really stood out to me was, let's see if I can find it, was this particular slide. Don't tell me I don't, oh, there it is. So can you see on this slide, there's a little mark over there. Let's just bring it up. A little mark over there. There's a mark over there, and there's a marker over there, and another one there. And what this suggests is that there was blood that was spattered, I guess, on the side of this vehicle, and to some extent lower down, and to some extent over there, right? And we saw on this particular slide an area of convergence. A lot of looks like blood spatter or blood drops on the other side. Sorry, on this side as well. You can see there's one sticker in place. I think that's a sticker, and that they haven't yet processed this part of the vehicle. There's nothing there or there or there, but that area of convergence appears to be somewhere around here. And obviously these smears are left by the tires. And so the question is, did something happen here just based on looking at it visually? Well, the area of convergence appears to be there, right? So anyway, like I said earlier, I would be very interested to know, where did she normally park her Chevy Suburban? Was it this side or the other side? As a mother, what would you say? You know, if they were doing a school run and a lot of the school bags on the other side, which side do you think it would likely be? So the other thing that's interesting is there appears to be blood evidence on this side of the vehicle, but as far as I can see, not on the other side. So on the left side, if you're looking at the vehicle from the back, and the front side, but not the right side. In other words, not against this vehicle on the right side. And I think that can be suggestive of two things. One is that the crime may have happened, the actual execution of the crime may have happened in this general area, right? Or it could have, the attack could have taken place here, and she was then taken to this side. Remember, there's a vehicle here. She was then taken to this side, where she was then, after the struggle was over, she was then perhaps bundled into a blanket or who knows what, and then from there carried this way, and perhaps her hair, if her hair was wet, went like that and sprinkled blood over here. That's one interpretation. The other interpretation is that everything happened over here, and the perpetrator later would walk around this way to perhaps dispose of things in the garbage, right? Does that make sense? All I'm saying is that it's quite difficult, given the amount of erased evidence, to actually figure out what did happen here. Okay, let's go back to that.
Of the PDF. And a number on the top says 3.25. What does that mean?
That's the approximate measurement.
Ria, good to see you here.
Could you please explain on the, I guess, working your way from left to right, if you could just explain some of the markings. You have A, B, C. What is that?
So these were evidentiary zones that allowed us to segment the garage into a more workable space. And then I was able to take measurements from each evidentiary zone and elaborate or blow it up into a larger map.
With respect to the, I guess, zone G, why is that in the middle, or why is that depicted like that?
So G contained a vehicle at the time of processing, and we mapped G with the Range Rover in place as found by detectives.
And DEF?
Same as A, B, and C, it was in the southernmost garage bay. It was split into 3 evidentiary zones.
On the upper right side, or I'm sorry, not even upper
The valid
right
question.
side, but on the right side, there is an arrow that has a number.
Elise, good to
and
see
it's
you.
21, starting with 21. Can you just explain what that is?
Yep, so this is the interior dimension from wall to wall, which would be east-west in a measurement of 21 feet 1 inch.
Did you measure from, I guess it would be north-south as well?
I did, so from north to south.
So one of the things I've already visualized, and you've got to start somewhere. Obviously, you don't want to stay anchored or get too attached to your theory. But one of the things I've considered is that she gets out the vehicle and perhaps gets as far as almost those steps. And that is when and I think the way I imagine it is that she was attacked with a knife and at the same time a hand placed over her mouth. And the only reason I say that is, as far as I know, no bullet sounds were heard, and that doesn't mean a gun wasn't used. But the alternative is that a knife was used, then you might say, well, why wasn't screaming used? But if it was a simultaneous attack with a knife and hand over the face, then that would correspond to some extent a struggle. It is quite a good point to make. Why is there no blood on her jacket and no blood on her purse? And that would suggest that she actually made it into the house and kind of put it down there. Does that make sense? And so it does seem to suggest that she got either to those steps or almost out the house when this happened. Of course, another possibility, she may have left her purse in a vehicle. I'm not sure how realistic that is. And then someone else carried it out. But the fact that there's no blood on the purse and the jacket suggests to me that she had time to put it down. And she was then forced back into the garage after whatever happened. So in the very early examination of this, it seems to me to be a strangulation associated with being stabbed with some other weapon in order to speed up the execution of the crime. I think it's a valid point to make if you say there's not enough blood for something like being stabbed, and that may be true. That may be true.
Footing to footing, the interior measurement was approximately.
Thanks very much, Al. Thank you.
Inches.
Now, you also have writing on the left-hand side, and I'm putting my cursor on it over here. What does this mean?
This is part of our map legend, which is generally included in every map that we produce, and it includes the case number, the date, the type of case, the location, my name and signature, as well as the scale, north arrow, and whether or not it's one of the series.
Now, there's a marking right in, I guess, grid B that states area of convergence. What is that?
Area of convergence was determined on scene through measurements of the blood stains found relevant to this investigation. It's where a line is drawn through the long axis of each blood stain, and where those lines intersect in a two-dimensional plane is what's called the area of convergence.
Mm-hmm. Did you determine the area of convergence in this case?
I did not.
Who did?
Lieutenant Colonel Davidson.
Is the area depicted on the map conveyed at the area B where it says area of convergence?
That's the area of
That
convergence,
documented
right?
Where that area was determined to be?
Yes, approximately.
Okay. And up here on G, on the, I guess, top middle, what is that supposedly supposed to depict?
So something else that's interesting to consider is if Jennifer was taken from the garage, placed back into her vehicle, right? Is that what created the blood there? In other words, in this effort to load her into a particular door of the vehicle, is that what created that area of convergence? And you might say, well, shouldn't it be a little bit further back? That's valid. Was the vehicle parked rear end first? How did she normally park? I would say probably not, given the way that this vehicle is parked, but who knows? Another possibility is that the driver had blood stains on his shoes or something, and perhaps stepped into blood somewhere else, and in the effort to get into his vehicle, that's what created this area of convergence. Can you see it's quite complicated what you'd imagine should be a simple crime scene?
That was 2 wooden stairs that left the garage floor and entered a entry door into a mudroom of the home.
You can have a seat, Sergeant Pearson. Did you map any other part of the garage, or I'm sorry, not the garage, the residence?
I did not.
On states 8, picture 2. Sergeant Pearson, if you can just take a look behind you. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
Yes,
What is it?
that is the northernmost garage bay of 69 Wells Lane.
And I also see an A, B, C. What are those markings?
Those correspond with the evidentiary zones that we just saw in the map in that left or northernmost bay.
Did you conduct this, by the way, did you put the yellow marking tape down?
I did not.
Okay, who did?
Lieutenant Colonel Davison.
Was that done before any seizing of exhibits or documentation of any exhibits that were found in the garage?
On the 27th, yes.
And
so what you have is kind of a classic case of woods and trees. You can get so bogged down in those drops of blood that you start saying, what happened here? Like literally exactly what happened here, and saying at the end of that, it's actually not very clear what happened here. But the bottom line is, okay, do you think a murder was committed here? And in terms of that, it's not like one drop of blood. There's blood all over. There's not a lot of blood that's remained after the cleaning, but you wouldn't expect a lot of blood after a 2-hour cleanup operation. In fact, there is quite a lot of blood, given that there was a 2-hour cleanup operation, right? Arguably 2 hours, 15 minutes. And so where's the blood? There's blood in quadrants. Let's go back to that slide. There's blood over here, quite a lot over here. There's blood over there, and even over here. If you imagine someone spending 2 hours cleaning blood up, and so much of that blood is left over, and there's blood over here, over there, and over there. I think you can say someone didn't just stub their toe. I think that was something Letitia Stork mentioned when it came up that there was blood on a piece of wood in the garage. I think she said it could have been a woodworking accident or something like that. This is not just somebody stubbing their toe. There's a variety of blood evidence all over. And I suppose, sorry, it's actually really small. And I suppose we're going to have an expert who's going to try and interpret the type of blood spatter and how it could have been left. I do know in the Oscar Pistorius case, you had very, very fine drops. And that was from the victim's, she suffered a head wound and blood had soaked into her hair. And when Oscar was carrying her downstairs, her hair would go like this. and those very, very small drops of blood got onto the side of the stairwell. And that is slightly different to high velocity blood spatter. That is blood spatter caused by a slower moving object. And one wonders whether you have a situation like that here. Is there going to be high velocity blood spatter anywhere, or is there going to be that sort of trail left by hair doing that? And bear in mind, Jennifer had quite long brown hair. I'd be very interested to know if they found any hair evidence in the vehicles, in any of the garbage. Is there any hair evidence that they found? Yeah, swinging hair. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, let's continue.
I'm going to draw your attention to right behind you again. Sergeant Pearson, do you recognize what's depicted on the screen? This is states 8, picture 3.
Yes.
What is it?
This is a blowout of evidentiary zone A in that northern garage bay.
Would you mind also getting back up and pointing to a few things? I apologize. Thank you. Okay. On the, I guess, right middle, there are these dots with a letter and number, A18, A17, A16. What are those supposed to represent?
So items that are listed not as an exhibit. So for example, 18, 17, and 16, as well as 15, 14, 13, and 12. Those are items that were used for blood pattern analysis. Not necessarily exhibits unless it states next to it.
So with respect to A18, and then there's a parentheses, exhibit number 41, parentheses, close parentheses, what does that mean?
That is a piece of evidence, so seized as exhibit 41, but also utilized in the bloodstain pattern analysis.
So you kind of have a double, it's like a double evidence item. On the one hand, it is part of a pattern, and on the other hand, it is of evidentiary value itself because it is possibly going to show DNA, and it could even be that it's clean to such an extent that those other A12, A13 may not be demonstrably blood. They may just say, well, it looks like blood, but we can't prove it. So as I said earlier, A15 and A18 could be that the DNA is either a match or a partial match to Jennifer Dulos, or it could even just be the fact that they've been able to prove that it's blood. It might be that weak, right? So I want to go a little bit away from this, the trial, and I want to deal with something that's really quite puzzling and kind of strange in terms of this is quite a high-profile case, and yet the media seem to give it a wide berth. And that came up in a story. Bear in mind, this happened in May 2019, 24th of May 2019. And then this story came out in Roger Friedman's Showbiz 411. Let's just, can you guys see that? What just happened? Just lost that story. Okay, here it is. And it says here, the real story New York media doesn't tell about Jennifer Farber, missing since last May in a very, very wealthy Wall Street fashion world family, right? And so you kind of get this weird sense of someone who's a really important figure, someone who's a very noticeable figure. Why is the media kind of seeming to stay silent about what's going on? And it's not just that, it's this ongoing thing. Where is she? And not even the media is asking about it. And I'm in a way dealing with the same thing. There's an 80-year-old woman who's been missing for 10 days in Britain. 10 days. Her name's Gloria Clark. and there've been maybe 3 or 4 news articles. It's nothing like the coverage we saw in Nicola Bully. And although I don't think that is as applicable because it's just 10 days, this was almost a year later. They were saying, why is New York media not really covering this? And look at what they say here. The New York Times, New York Magazine, Vanity Fair, even the Hartford Courant, not one of them has written an actual story about Jennifer Dulos, missing and presumed dead since last May, right? That is quite an extraordinary thing to say. And again, this is dated March 8th, 2020, almost a year later. And then it took about 6 months from this. Let's just see, April, May, June, July, August, September, 5-6 months for an article to appear later that year in Vanity Fair that is about Jennifer Farber, right? Jennifer Dulos. And it seems to be written by someone who is Greek. I think Grigoriadis sounds like a Greek name, right? And so let's just have a look at this article. Before she disappeared in the spring of last year, Jennifer seemed to have everything she wanted. She had a handsome Greek-American husband, whom she married in a big affair at the Metropolitan Club in 2004, right? So their marriage lasted about 15 years, maybe less. She died 15 years after she married this guy. She had 5 young children, all with Greek names, in a nod to Dulos's country of ancestry. And what that's already showing is that, as far as I know, Farber isn't a Greek name. You kind of got the idea that Jennifer, I don't want to say handed herself over, but kind of got, to some extent, subsumed in Greek culture. And I was at school with Greek kids, and the Greeks definitely have their own vibe, their own way of doing things, their own way of partying. And sometimes they've got quite strong traditions in terms of when they get married, how they have their weddings, and all of that kind of thing. And sometimes in order to marry into the family, you've kind of got to become Greek. If you don't look Greek, that could be a problem. But if you, does that make sense? And that may have been the beginning stages of how Jennifer gave up her power and gave up her agency, and conversely, how Fotis gained a kind of power where more and more he was getting control over this woman who was kind of, if you're giving away control over your identity, right, it's kind of a sense that, well, someone else is perhaps gaining control over it, right? Mel says he was very possessive and controlling. So the other thing with, and I don't want to get into too much trouble here, but another thing just to consider with, let's just say, because I mean, not all Greeks are in the same way that not all Jews are a certain way. Some can be very liberal, some can be very, you wouldn't even know that they are a particular Greek or Jewish or whatever it is. Whereas others can be very much, I think the traditional is the best word. Some may be very traditional and they part of a traditional family. And then you've also got to ask the question, what would traditional family values be in the situation? And the answer might be that there's a patriarchy, that the men in the family have a certain role and the women in the family have a certain role. And that could be also part of the psychological fabric and the dynamic to this case. Well, we've got someone who can talk insightfully on the subject. I'm Greek, and my friend knew Fotis. He said he was very snobby. Yeah, the author, that's what I meant. The author's Greek. Anyway, I'll be interested to hear what Greek X Stitches says. Greek women are very strong. Okay. So what is the relationship between a Greek mother, so the mother, let's say Fotis's mother, and a daughter-in-law, who has the most power in a situation like that? Okay, interesting point. All I'm trying to say, I don't want to say too much about it, but all I'm trying to say is I think the fact that her husband was Greek is relevant, and then the question is how? Well, we're not sure exactly, right? Because the other thing to bear in mind is I think Michelle Troconis is Greek, and I could be wrong on that. Does anyone know for a fact, is Michelle Troconis Greek? So if you have a situation where a Greek guy marries a very wealthy woman who's not Greek, and then things don't work out, and then he ends up having another Greek girlfriend, it almost makes you think that he's felt the non-Greek thing didn't work for me, right? Cool, okay. I was at a point in a relationship with a Chinese Singaporean girl, and she was sort of warning me that they weren't going to accept me. So, you know, it can be a reality. Okay, so anyway, let's go back to this article. She lived in spectacular comfort in mansions in Connecticut with enough help that she could have continued the writing career she began in the 1990s, and Dulos could do what he wanted, though Faber didn't always know where he was going, and with whom. Money was never an issue. Now, one of the problems with money, like if somebody gives you money, it's never worth as much as if you made it yourself, right? And that's the impression I get, is that Faber was a conduit to a shitload of money, and it kept coming in. Money kept coming in, and so a lot of money was wasted. And money can be a disposable quantity when it's somebody else's money. When it's your money, then it's a totally different story. When you worked hard for it, the thing that I think is easy to miss is that Jennifer was from a spectacularly rich situation. It kind of makes me think of an inverted Great Gatsby tragedy, where instead of the Great Gatsby being a man, it's a woman, and instead of the woman in the story having an affair, it's the person that she's involved with in a weird way. So, but it does make me think that we are talking about Gatsby levels of extravagant wealth in Connecticut. And when you follow that camera through the crime scene, it really is a massive house. Like in one instance, I think the body cam is an hour and 40 minutes, just literally opening cupboards, going into a bedroom, and so on. So here we have it. Faber came from a wealthy New York family, and Dulos was a luxury real estate developer, but not a difficult market. And yet he was struggling. He was struggling to make it in this not difficult market. Why is that? So it looks like I'm going to sign into this. Let's just see if it's going to let me do that from this computer. That's quite an interesting point, that he lived in a very affluent life in Greece. Michelle grew up in Miami. Okay, I just want to log in here. Thought I had. Timmy, you're really making me hot. Sorry, let's just give it a moment. You have too many pages open. Let's have a look at your comments. Faber sounds Jewish to me as far as her father. Not sure what her mother is. I must say that's my thought. I'd say that without confirmation, but I assume that she might be Jewish myself. Okay, so let's go back to this article. Faber had long coveted this type of all-encompassing domestic lifestyle. Can we get rid of that? Even if the surroundings were a bit different than her adolescent dreams, the New York Times wedding pages held a hypnotic sway over me since I discovered them at the age of 11, she wrote in an essay published in Personals. So you're already getting a sense that Jennifer Dulos is kind of a dreamer, kind of a romantic, kind of caught up in a fairy tale within her own fairy tale, but basically a daydreamer, right? That she's in a way not living in the real world, in the sense that she, and as I'm a writer myself, I've written over 100 books. I can tell you that anyone who writes a lot is not quite in the real world, even if your writing is about the real world. In other words, you're not so much in the real world of your own life because you are in some other reality. And so that was obviously the case with her. And money does have a way of doing that. Money can change reality, I guess is the best way of putting it. So she wrote here, entering the structured, ambitious black and white world at the back of the Sunday paper, I was window shopping for a life, right? Those are her words. I was window shopping for a life. It's quite a way to say that. Almost like I can buy the life that I want. Faber imagined the day when she'd live on Park Avenue in the 60s in a perfect 8 with a fireplace and service entrance and supervise our New York calendars. As always in New York, the good life came with great real estate. With the right apartment and the right husband, she'd be just like the other women in the paper, correctly poised supergirls, well-educated, accomplished, thoroughbred. Now, the part that's quite astonishing with this is we're dealing with a case that's in a way parallel to Rex Heuermann. Rex Heuermann was living in the fabric of Manhattan and Long Island, and he was also having dreams about buildings, right? Here you have Jennifer Faber, who's kind of having the same dream. She's dreaming about living somewhere in the vertical spires in that sort of concrete jungle, steel and concrete jungle of Manhattan. And she's imagining living in a beautiful, some kind of beautiful sparkling jewel in that unreal environment. And she's kind of thinking the way to get there is through a real estate dude, a guy who builds buildings. That's going to be my ticket to living in a structure that is going to be quite special. And so this is, let's just go a little bit further through the article. Like many women whose lives are outwardly perfect, her marriage had secrets. Dulos was a handsome guy, delicate features and a fastidious appearance. He hardly resembled Mr. Rochester, but according to a longtime friend, he had a similar personality. He was rigid, moody, gloomy, and quick to inform her of her shortcomings, right? So she is with a bit of a male chauvinist person, a guy who's not flexible, a guy who's not seemingly all that sensitive unless it's about himself, and a guy who's quite critical of his wife. And then, yeah, he seemed quite far from the man he pretended to be, and the series of actions he took in the years since Faber's disappearance could not have proved that more. But let's just focus on that. He seemed far from the man he pretended to be. Now, I must say, if you're talking about fastidious, I'm not kidding when I say Rex Heuermann was described by his colleagues as meticulous, detail-oriented. He's described as fastidious, which has more to do with how you look, how you present yourself. And so, although he's fastidious, whoever committed this crime in that garage wasn't particularly paying attention to details. I mean, they left behind an orgy of evidence. So it's one thing to be fastidious about yourself. How good are you at paying attention to things beyond yourself, such as a business? And the answer is he was terrible. He wasn't a very good business person. He kept needing bailouts from his wife. And I can't help comparing Fotis Dulos to Barry Morphew, just in terms of he comes across in a certain way, but then there's another person as well. So they describe Fotis as rigid, moody, gloomy, and critical. I definitely get the idea that Barry Morphew could be quite critical of Suzanne Morphew, and that was almost a way of keeping her in check. Does that make sense? So that's just what I wanted to share with you. And all of this came out in an article only published in October 2020, basically almost a year and a half after everything happened. And you kind of got to wonder, why was New York so silent on this? The New York media, like what was going on in terms of that? Did the families that are involved in this have other secrets, other skeletons in the closet? Otherwise, wouldn't they engage with the media? If you've got so much money, wouldn't you engage with the media and almost was going to say like the Ramses and the McCanns to find this person that's missing, right? Why wouldn't you do that? Okay, so anyway, let's go back to the CBS. We'll just take that a little bit further. The other person we want to get to know in this story is Michelle Troconis. And what is the reason why she point in being challenged, or it feels like there's no point? There's no point in trying any harder. There's no point in suffering. That should be the idea, but a lot of people don't use it that way. Okay. It looks like we're going to end off this live stream at about the 2-hour mark. Jennifer has 5 kids, never boring. So let's have a look. Has the trial resumed? Doesn't look like it. Still not resuming. Okay. Again, I can't get over the fact that this blank screen essentially has got almost 2,000 viewers. That's the way life is, right? That's the way life is. Susan B says, I've got to get back to work. Me as well. I think I'm going to work on a edited video. That's the downside with trial coverage, is you can spend 2 hours covering the trial only for there not to be a trial. Let's have a look at this last comment.
And he had to wait for breaks.
Okay, so we're going to leave it at that. And I just want to thank you guys for being here. The mods, Chelsea, Stephanie, I'm glad to see you here again. I know you were on your post for a lot of the day yesterday. Thanks very much. Thanks a lot for the super chats, YouTube. Appreciate it. Marcel says they should be back in a few minutes. They're supposed to return at 2. Okay, I'm not sure if I want to hang around for 8 more minutes. Especially since I've started saying my goodbyes. Sandy's like, I made it live. Yeah. Well, I'm just about to skedaddle. Terry says, darn, bad timing on my part. Yeah. Yeah, so I think I'm going to end off at this point. And I'll be back for day 3. And we'll see how far I take it. I wouldn't want to do too many days that are like today. Let's see what evidence comes out today. I'm definitely not going to cover 5 hours of trial like some creators. I mean, if it's really interesting, really fascinating, if Michelle Troconis testifies, I think that would be worth covering. Otherwise, I'm not so sure. Okay, thanks, guys. I'm gonna just do that and then say adios, amigos.